Another Friday, another JoeLumb's movie review. This week I'll be covering Death Wish 3. Over the past 2 weeks I've covered two Death Wish movies. 2 weeks ago was the first one and last week was the second. When you're done watching this video, you can go back and watch all my other previous videos on my JoeLumb movie review playlist. It's in the description box. And now on with the video. Death Wish 3 is a 1985 American vigilante action thriller film, directed and edited by Michael Winner. It is the third and final film to be directed by Winner in the Death Wish film series. It stars Charles Bronson as vigilante killer Paul Kersey, and sees him battling with New York street punk gangs while receiving tactical support from a local NYPD lieutenant played by Ed Lauter. Despite being set in New York City, some of the filming was shot in London to reduce production costs. It was succeeded by Death Wish 4 to crack down 2 years later. Death Wish 3 was greenlit in June of 1981 after the previous film earned back its budget before completing production when it signed a cable television distribution deal with HBO. Following the success of Death Wish 2, Cannon Films proceeded in signing film contracts with prestigious actors and directors. Financially, their most reliable products were formulaic action films starring Charles Bronson, Chuck Norris, and other stars of the genre. The new sequel to Death Wish was announced at the 1984 Cannes Film Festival, with filming originally to begin in the autumn of 1984. Charles Bronson haggled with Cannon over his fee, so they offered the role to Chuck Norris, who turned it down, claiming that violence in the movie was too negative. The concept of Paul Kersey facing a street gang which terrorized elderly citizens was developed by screenwriter Don Jacoby. Jacoby specialized in science fiction films, having developed scripts for other upcoming films such as Life Force and Invaders from Mars. His screenplay reportedly turned Kersey into an urban version of John Rambo, which displeased Bronson in the process. The producers then asked Gail Morgan Hickman to write other potential versions of the script, with 3 different script samples, and submitted them for approval, only to learn weeks later that they were all rejected in favor of keeping Jacoby's version. The film incorporated 2 elements of the Death Wish novel by Brian Garfield. The first was the concept of a giggling Puerto Rican thug. The second was the use of a car as bait for the thieves. According to the book Bronson's Loose by Paul Talbot, the original working title Death Wish 3 was changed to Death Wish 3 because the Cannon Group conducted a survey and found out that nearly half of the U.S. population could not read Roman numerals. Are you fucking kidding me? I mean, literally. The filming started on April 19, 1985 in a crime-infested area of Brooklyn. Other New York locations used for the film included the Queensboro Bridge, the Port Authority Bus Terminal, and Long Island. In early May, the production team moved to London. Winner found it useful that both cities had a lot of Victorian buildings. The police station scenes were filmed at the old Lambeth Hospital in Lambeth, which has since been demolished. The neighborhood used for a gang war of the film was Brixton, a district which was infested with real-life gangs. Cinematographer John Stanier was previously director of photography for Oxford Blues, which was released a year earlier, and The Dirty Dozen Next Mission, which was released in 1985. He would subsequently film Rambo 3 in 1988. In his introduction to the Audible audiobook, The Saint Intervenes, Brad Mangle states that the plot is entirely based on The Saint in New York, both by Leslie Charteris. Even though Death Wish 3 takes place in New York City, some parts of the film were shot in London to make the production less expensive. As a result, some of the extras, both police and gang members, were British. When filming was complete, Michael Winner solicited the help of the U.S. Air Force military personnel stationed at High Wycombe Air Station in the UK to provide dubbing with their New York accents for the accents of the British extras. Of the British actors who appeared, Marina Satiris had previously worked for Michael Winner on The Wicked Lady, released in 1983. She followed her appearance in this film with landing the role of Deanna Troi on the TV show Star Trek Next Generation. Paul Kersey returns to New York for the first time in 10 years after he was banned for what happened in the first Death Wish film. He visits his old Korean War buddy Charlie, who was attacked by a gang in his East New York apartment. When the neighbors hear the commotion, they call the police. When Paul arrives and Charlie collapses in his arms, he was dead. The police mistake Paul for the murderer, and he is arrested. At the police station, Chief Richard Stryker recognizes Paul as Mr. Vigilante. He lays down the law before Paul is taken into a holding cell. In the same cell is Manny Fraker, the leader of the gang who just killed Charlie. After a fight between Paul and him, Manny is released. The police receive daily reports about the increased crime rate. The police chief offers Paul a deal. He can kill as many punks as he wants as long as he informs Stryker of any gang activity he hears about so he can get a bust and make the news. So Paul moves into Charlie's apartment in a gang turf war zone. The building is populated by elderly tenants, terrified by Manny's gang. They include Benny Cross, a World War II veteran, and Charlie's buddy, an elderly Jewish couple by the name of Mr. and Mrs. Kaprov, and a young Hispanic couple of Rodriguez and his wife Maria. After a few violent muggings, Paul buys a used car as bait. When two gang members try to break into the car, Paul shoots him with his Colt Cobra. 2 times, Paul protects Maria from the gang, but is unable to save her the 3rd time when she was assaulted and raped, later dying in a hospital from her injuries. So Paul orders a new gun, a Wildy hunting pistol. He spends the afternoon with Bennett hand-loading ammunition for it. He tests the gun out when the giggler steals his Nixon camera. Paul is applauded by the neighborhood as Stryker and the police take the credit. Kersey also throws a gang member off the roof. Wow. Public defender Catherine Davis is moving out of the city as Kersey offers to take her to dinner. While waiting in his car, Catherine is knocked unconscious by Manny, and the car is pushed down a hill onto oncoming traffic. Slamming into another car, it explodes and kills Catherine. Stryker places Kersey under protective custody. Towards the end of the film, Paul Kersey and Rodriguez collect weapons. They proceed to mow down many criminals before running out of ammunition, while other neighbors begin to fight back as Manny sends in reinforcements. Stryker decides to help, and Kersey and he take down as many gang members together. Kersey then goes back to the apartment to collect more ammunition, but Manny finds him there. Stryker arrives to shoot Manny, but not before getting wounded in the arm. As Kersey calls for an ambulance, Manny, who's secretly wearing a bulletproof vest, rises and turns his gun on the 2 men. As Stryker distracts him, Kersey uses a mail-ordered M72 Law rocket launcher to obliterate Manny. The remainder of the gang rushes to the scene and sees Manny's smoldering remains. Surrounded by an angry crowd of neighbors, the gang realizes they lost and flee the scene. As the neighbors cheer in celebration and the police sirens in the distance, Stryker gives Kersey the head start. Paul gives a look of appreciation and then takes off. Death Wish 3 was released in movie theaters on November 1st, 1985 on 1,460 screens and was the #1 movie at the U.S. box office for the weekend with a gross of $5,319,116. It was #1 the following weekend too. The film earned $16.1 million in a 7-week run. Profits from foreign release in video and television were sufficient to make this a lucrative release for Canon Films, following the budget of $9 to $10 million. My overall rating for Death Wish 3 is a 70 out of 100. After its release in theaters, Death Wish 3 received primarily negative reviews. Rotten Tomatoes reports an 11% approval rating based on 18 reviews, with a weighted average of 3.23 out of 10. Roger Ebert remarked that the film is a marginal improvement over Death Wish 2, with better action, directing, and special effects, but is still poor in absolute terms. He commented that Bronson's acting showed his lack of enthusiasm for the film and gave it a star. Some lambasted the film for its sadistic, over-violent content and the fact that a 64-year-old Charles Bronson was thrown into a Rambo-like situation, said Leonard Martin. Same old stuff. Bronson's ordinary guy character is no longer convincing, since his entire immediate family was wiped out by the end of Part 2. In later years, it gathered a cult following possibly due to its over-the-top nature, including lengthy action scenes, particularly the shoot-'em-up finale. Stylized violence, cheesy dialogue, and a memorable one-liners. Its unreality, in some cult circles, been seen as so bad it's hilariously good. This has been JoeLumb's Movie Review.